All right, let's start with the good news. And the good news is that we're past Bye-Mageddon, and the only byes that we're dealing with in week 14 are going to be Arizona and Washington. So we're really not missing any studs. But let's talk about the bad news. And the bad news is that we lost several key players to injuries this past week, and the waiver wire is as bare as it's been all season long. Hopefully you've done your work this season. You've stacked your roster and it's reinforced to deal with any injuries that you may be dealing with. Because if you haven't done that, trying to make your way through the playoffs to a championship is gonna be quite the task. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everybody is doing well out there today and that week 13 was a success for you. But we turn our attention to week 14 now at this point, and we need to make sure that if our roster is dealing with injuries right now, that we have the guys to help us make through not the rest of the regular season, but the playoffs as well. So hit the like button and turn those bell notifications on, and let's hop right into it. I've got running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we could take a shot at for the rest of the year, and then some quarterbacks and defensive teams that we could potentially stream in week 14. All right, the first four guys on the running back list are going to be backups to players who are currently dealing with injuries. And if you have those players that are dealing with said injuries, these are guys that you absolutely have to have. Now, if you don't have those players dealing with injuries, but you might have a couple of spots on your roster and your bench that you could utilize for some backup players, it may not be a bad idea to pick up one of these guys. The first running back is going to be DJ Dallas, and Zach Charbonnet, we don't have a ton of information on his status as of yet, or where Kenneth Walker stands trying to return from his injury as well. Zach Charbonnet did seem to avoid a serious knee injury and is just dealing with a bruise. But if he can't go this week, and if Kenneth Walker will still miss, DJ Dallas will likely be the #1 running back, even though the matchup itself would absolutely stink. DJ Dallas really should only be picked up if you own Kenneth Walker and or Zach Charbonnet, and you absolutely need somebody to stand in. Also, not a lot of information on Ramondre Stevenson as of yet. It does sound like he's going to be going for an MRI on that ankle to try and figure out how serious it is. It sounds like it could end up being a sprain, and yeah, that could end up costing him the rest of the season, but it also could put him in a position to maybe return in a few weeks for the fantasy playoffs if you own him. But Ezekiel Elliott is going to be a guy that is a must-own across the board. If you own Ramondre Stevenson, you absolutely need to grab Zeke. If you don't own Ramondre Stevenson and you need some help at the running back position, still grab Zeke, because he's going to be one of these guys that maybe the ceiling isn't that high, but a starter the rest of the season on waivers available in 14 doesn't come around very often. I would grab him now. Derrick Henry was having a fantastic game until he went into the concussion protocol, and now heading into week 14, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not he gets cleared before then. If not, Tajay Spears is going to be in for a huge workload, and I absolutely would be grabbing him if he is still available out there. Now, a majority of people have kind of started to drop him, but as I've been telling you for weeks, if you own Derrick Henry, you should own Spears as well. If you don't own Derrick Henry, I don't know if Spears is going to be a priority, because even if Derrick Henry isn't cleared for this week, it is likely that he'd be cleared for the following games after that. So Spears might only be a 1-week fill-in, because with Derrick Henry, Spears doesn't have a lot of standalone value. But on his own, given the volume just by itself, he could be a decent start this week, especially in PPR leagues. Now, Antonio Gibson is going to be on a bye this week, so he actually could end up being a little bit cheaper for you, because people aren't going to be really wanting to run out there and spend fab or a high waiver priority on somebody who's not even going to help them in week 14. And Brian Robinson is dealing with a hamstring, and we all know those things can linger. So even though we won't know his status for a while for week 15, it may still be in our best interest to grab Antonio Gibson in case A, Brian Robinson misses altogether, or B, he's limited. but Antonio Gibson has been seeing an increased workload in the passing game even the couple of weeks prior. So even if Brian Robinson plays in week 15, there is a shot that he still sees limited reps and Antonio Gibson sees more reps than what we've been used to. I'm going to go ahead and toss Kenneth Gainwell back up on here because if you take a look at what DeAndre Swift has done in recent weeks, it really hasn't been that great. And against San Francisco this past week, it also was not great. Kenneth Gainwell saw a few more targets there towards the end of the game and was definitely on the field more often when Philadelphia went down big. Now, with the way DeAndre Swift has played recently, I don't think he should be in fear of losing his job right now. But if we see another down performance in week 14, week 15 could bring a whole new workload for Kenneth Gainwell. And even though Monday Night Football has not played as of this recording, D'Ernest Johnson, I'm going to bring his name up once again, knowing that Travis Etienne was banged up with rib injury heading into the game. So just keep an eye on that. If for some reason Travis Etienne has to leave early, is limited in any way, shape, or form, doesn't end up getting the touches that we like, anything like that that would point to him being more injured than what's being led on, then D'Ernest Johnson absolutely needs to be grabbed by all Travis Etienne owners. All right, the wide receiver position, not nearly as deep on the waivers this week as what we typically see in these videos. And we're going to kick it off with Devontae Parker. Listen, you know the waivers are super thin when we're talking about fantasy Bigfoot himself. Devontae Parker. Now, Demario Douglas missed week 13, and because of that, Devontae Parker saw 9 targets, which led the team. If Demario Douglas plays in week 14, I have no interest in Devontae Parker, but on Thursday night, if Demario wasn't able to clear last week, there is going to be a little bit of a rushed expectation on whether or not he can clear this week. And if he doesn't, Devontae Parker going up against Pittsburgh could see some similar workload, even if we don't see the type of fantasy output that we would need to start him. Alec Pierce hasn't done anything all season long, and then all of a sudden he comes out with 3 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown this past week. He had more targets than what Josh Downs did, and this might be a one-week wonder, but we're going to keep an eye on it because Gardner Minshew, he doesn't really push the ball down the field that often, and for some reason, they just found the key to making that work last week. Does it work moving forward? If it does, Pierce could have some sustained fantasy value, but it also could be a one-hit wonder, and we'll be talking about someone else next week. Noah Brown was still banged up this past week, and we'll see how healthy he is heading into week 14, but now that we know that Tank Dell is going to be done for the year, and what we saw from Noah Brown earlier in the season when Nico Collins missed some games, Noah Brown definitely needs to be added to rosters for those of you that need a little bit of a pep in your wide receiver position. Noah Brown might not be a fantasy winner right now, but he definitely could be a fantasy championship contributor. Jonathan Mingo led all Carolina pass catchers with 10 targets, 6 receptions, and 69 yards. Does that keep up this week? It's really hard to tell with the Carolina offense. It's up and down, left and right, side to side. Who knows what's going on with them in any given week? Bryce Young right now, unfortunately, looks lost, and I don't believe it's his entire fault. It's definitely the coaching staff and the offensive line and really everything else combined that is making this a frustrating rookie season for him. But if we can get Jonathan Mingo 10 targets a game down the stretch, knowing that Carolina is going to continue to throw it an awful lot, hey, that works for me. Chris Godwin was banged up going into week 13, and Trey Palmer is definitely an interesting guy to keep an eye on if Chris Godwin has to miss any time coming up. Trey Palmer doesn't really have a whole lot of value with Chris Godwin, but if he becomes a wide receiver 2 next to Mike Evans, he definitely could see some wide receiver 3 fantasy-like production. Elijah Moore has had at least 7 targets each of the last 4 weeks, with a team-high 12 targets this past week, while Amari Cooper was banged up and had to leave the game early. When you take a look at this Cleveland Browns offense, it's been up and down at the quarterback position, but maybe Joe Flacco is the guy to help lead them into the playoffs. We'll keep an eye on how Joe Flacco does over the coming weeks, but it is very possible that Elijah Moore at worst will be the number 2 target in this offense if Joe Flacco is going to be the quarterback. And if Amari Cooper has to miss any time, he'll be the wide receiver 1. Jalen Hyatt is coming out of the bye, but a couple of weeks ago, he looked like a breakout candidate candidate going over 100 yards. We'll see if that continues this week in their matchup, and if it doesn't, it really isn't that big of a deal. We're picking up Jalen Hyatt maybe as a high upside fantasy stash that we could throw out there in really good matchups. But if he doesn't continue the production, it's all right. We'll just toss him back to waivers. If you're going to pick him up, though, don't drop anybody of current value. For the tight end position, Gerald Everett saw really kind of a modest production day. 4 catches for 44 yards. Not a whole lot to write home about. 6 points in half PPR leagues. But Keenan Allen is banged up right now, and we know how tough the injuries have been at the wide receiver position. So while I'm not starting Gerald Everett anytime soon, we are just keeping him on the radar if guys in Los Angeles continue to deal with injuries. Is Chigioco starting to break out here at the end of 2023? That's kind of what we saw at the end of 2022 when he saw that breakout stretch of games. And now we've waited all season long, and maybe he's there once again. Now, 3 receptions isn't great, but 6 targets and 62 receiving yards is. And over the last 2 weeks, he's had 11 targets combined. He's caught 7 of those for 107 yards. If we can get over 50 yards per game from Chigioco and still be right around 3 to 4 receptions per game, he absolutely is a guy that those dealing with injuries at the tight end position or who have been streaming all season long could now stream Chigioco. Brevin Jordan definitely saw a little bit of an increased usage with Dalton Schultz missing this past week. Now, Brevin Jordan is not a guy that I'm picking up if Dalton Schultz were not to miss again. But if Dalton Schultz does miss, if we get towards the end of the week and find out he may not play, then Brevin Jordan, especially with Tank Dell missing now, is going to be a guy that is definitely streamable in week 14. And for Tyler Conklin, he's going to make another appearance here on the waiver wire video. 9 targets. And the last time this happened, it was kind of a fool me once scenario. We'll see if we get fooled twice, however. The counting stats this past week were not great. But if we can continue to get him 7, 8, 9 targets a week, it's definitely going to make it an interesting thought. All right, let's go streaking. Nope, sorry, I meant streaming. Let's go streaming. And we're going to talk about quarterbacks first that you could potentially use this week if you're needing to stream at the position. First up will be Desmond Ridder going up against a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that allows the 4th most passing yards on the season. Now, for me, Desmond Ridder, even with the good matchup, doesn't have a very high ceiling. It's the floor that benefits him from the matchup. So when I take a look at Desmond Ridder this week, I'm not expecting a fantasy winning performance, but I'm definitely assuming that there could be one coming from him that at least won't lose me the week. Gardner Minshew put together one of his best performances of the season this past week, throwing for over 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Now going up against a Cincinnati defense that definitely is not as strong as we have seen in the couple of years prior, Gardner Minshew once again could be a great streaming option. And Will Levis, if you're looking for some high upside play going up against Miami, we know Will Levis is going to have to chuck it this week. Now, turnover potential is absolutely there, and that could definitely lead to a very shaky performance. But if Miami goes up on Tennessee and plays in front the entire time, Will Levis, we know, is going to have to throw the ball quite a bit, especially if Derrick Henry is missing this week. All right, what about some streaming options at the defensive position? And New England is a team, they suck right now, but their defense actually hasn't been that bad. And now they're going to get probably Mitchell Trubisky on a short week on Thursday Night Football. Yeah, lock me in for New England on Thursday night. New Orleans defense started off slow, played really, really well, and unfortunately just couldn't close it out there at the end of the game against Detroit. Excellent performance against a tough offense, but this week they get Carolina, which will be a lot easier and a cause for a lot of potential turnovers. In Green Bay, going up against the New York Giants, Matt LaFleur, while he's been the coach in Green Bay, has not lost a game in December as of yet. And Green Bay may be one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now. The New York Giants, maybe not so much. Definitely saw a little bit of an improvement from them last week on the offensive side of the ball. Tommy DeVito is slinging it and taking advantage of this opportunity. But Green Bay is a superior team and could shut down the Giants. All right, real quick before I get out of here, let's talk about droppable players. And once again this week, I'm not going to blanket approve dropping certain guys. We're dealing with way too many injuries right now here at the end of the season to just be getting rid of guys when I don't know the full aspects of your roster or who you even have available on the waiver wires that you would pick up over them. So as usual, like we've done the last couple of weeks, leave me a comment down below. Keep it short and sweet. Just put add whoever, drop whoever, and I'll respond to as many as I can later on today to try and help you figure out who you're dropping and who you're adding. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm going to go get started on those running backs. Peace out, everybody. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
I'm a headliner.